Welcome to the teacher seminar on question number 8 of our study guide, the introduction and the circular flow model. So we are moving into the stock market crash and the Great Depression. So we're moving into chapter 15. So we're going to be reading a few pages here. And then as we do that, you're going to be answering the questions within question number 8. What was the turning point from the boom to bust? Explain the crash in terms of buying and selling stocks. This will be in that blue section. And explain how the circular flow model works when industries have to lay off or fire employees. So this will be in that green section as we read. All right, so here we go. We're going to start by reading our introduction here about the stock market crash and the Great Depression. A Minnesotan named Wilbur Fauché had always admired the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. For years, he had dreamed of building an office tower modeled after the famous landmark. All he needed was a few million dollars. Where was he going to get that kind of money? In 1916, Fauché borrowed $6,000 and started buying up small companies that sold gas, electricity, and water. He combined these into one large company and then sold stock or shares in ownership of that company. The shares of stock were bought and sold on the stock market. Investors liked Fauché's ideas. They bought stock, putting millions of dollars into this company. In 1927, Fauché had built a fortune of about $22 million, more than enough money to build that skyscraper he had been dreaming of. He decided to construct his office building in downtown Minneapolis. The people of Minneapolis watched with wonder as Fauché's tower rose higher and higher above the city skyline. The magnificent structure was 32 stories high, making it the tallest building west of the Mississippi. Because it seemed to prove anything was possible, it symbolized people's hopes for the future. In August 1929, Fauché held a 3-day celebration to mark the completion of the Fauché Tower. He was, as they say, on top of the world. Unfortunately, Fauché did not stay there for long. 2 months later, on October 29th of 1929, the stock market crashed. Fauché's fortune, which was based on the value of his company's stock, disappeared. The money he had received from investors had already been spent on his company. By November, he was broke. So were many of the people who had invested in his company. The stock market crash of 1929 was a turning point for the boom and bust in the history of the United States and Minnesota. So there's your answer to the first question there. The stock market crash of 1929 was the turning point from boom to bust in the history of the United States and Minnesota. Before the crash, the economy was booming. Many city dwellers believed that life was good and would only get better. Even farmers who struggled during the 1920s had hoped that better times were ahead. After the crash, everything was different. This bust started an economic crisis that we now call the Great Depression. It swept across the nation and touched lives throughout Minnesota, from cities to small towns and farms. Here's a picture of the tower he built, guys, the Fauché Tower, which is still in Minneapolis today, although it's not even close to the tallest building in Minneapolis anymore. Okay. All right, let's keep moving. All right, here we go. The crash and the Great Depression. So this is that blue section where you're going to be answering that second question, explaining the crash and the buying and selling of stocks. Some Americans in the late 20s saw the stock market as a way to get rich quickly. They could hardly be blamed for thinking of it that way. Investors bought shares in a business at a low price, and in a short time, they were worth a lot more. Stock prices were doubling and tripling. The investors could then turn around and sell those same stocks to make a large profit. More and more investors scrambled to buy shares in all sorts of companies without considering the risks. Many people spent all of their savings on stocks. Others borrowed to join in on the action. All of that buying and selling of stocks ended with the crash. When people talk about the crash of 1929, they're referring to the sudden fall of stock prices and the panic that fed the collapse. All of a sudden, investors were scrambling to sell the stocks before they lost all of their value, but investors couldn't sell it if no one was buying. With no buyers, the value of their stocks sank lower and lower. The crash brought on a nationwide economic crisis we now call the Great Depression. The year before the crash, a slight economic downturn had caused many businesses to lay off workers and cancel orders for new equipment. Without the crash, the downturn probably would have corrected itself. The crash caused people to panic. As more people lost their jobs and were unable to purchase goods, more businesses went bankrupt and had to close. That caused even more people to lose their jobs. Worried Americans began holding on to their money instead of spending it. The economy kept getting worse. The Great Depression lasted for more than a decade, and it touched all Americans, rich, poor, and in between. So when we're talking about the Great Depression, when it has to do with stocks, what we're really looking at here, guys, is this part right here, okay? Is where it says here, all of a sudden, investors were scrambling to sell their stocks before they lost all their value. But investors couldn't sell if no one wanted to buy. With no buyers, the value of the stock sank lower and lower. So the way this worked is you had stock prices that were falling and falling and falling and falling and falling and falling and falling. And so people were trying to sell, but nobody wanted to buy them. So they kept falling. And suddenly your stocks are worthless. You can't sell them. But if you can't sell them, you can't get any of the money that you put into it. So that's how people were losing all the money that they had. Okay, so that should help you answer the second question there. All right, let's take a look at this circular flow model, read about this, and that'll help us answer that last question. Okay, what happens when money stops flowing? Take a look at the circular flow model. You've seen this in previous chapters, showing how money and resources move through the economy. This time, we'll use the model to help us understand what happens when money doesn't move within the economy. All parts of the circular flow model are connected. When the flow of parts gets interrupted, the other parts suffer too. Look at the top half of the model. It shows the household work of Minnesotan industries, and those industries pay wages to households. During the Great Depression, industries laid off employees. When that happened, both arrows slowed down, sometimes stopped flowing altogether. Some households no longer worked for Minnesota industries, and some Minnesotans industries no longer paid households. As soon as the top arrows stopped flowing, they affected the bottom arrows. When households no longer had money to pay for goods and services, industries lost income. As a result, industries are no longer able to produce as many goods and services to sell. You may be familiar with the words recession and depression. Some economists think that an economic recession at a time when circular flow slows down, and a depression as a time when the flow between the arrows is seriously interrupted. Okay, so let's take a look at this a little bit more. Okay, so what we're talking about here, guys, is when we talk about when employees lose their jobs, right? Okay, that means there's no longer any wages coming into the household. Okay, so if there's not any wages coming into the household, they can't buy anything. Okay, so if you can't buy anything, then these factories, these companies, okay, they have to start laying off people. All right, which means there's less people going to work. Okay, so these things start slowing down. These things start stopping. Okay, so if there's people being laid off, that means wages aren't coming in, which means they can't buy things, which means they have to lay people off. So they're all connected, okay? They're all connected, right? And if we can't buy things, that means that they're making less, which means they have to lay off more people. So it just all connects with each other. It's all circular, all right? So one thing affects another. So what FDR tries to do when we talk about the New Deal is he tries to get people back to work, right, so that they can have money, so that they can buy more things. And if they buy more things, they have to make more stuff, which is going to get more people to work. Okay, but we'll talk about that more in the New Deal. All right, I hope that helps you with these 3 questions, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.